Okay, so a population size can be influenced by both biotic as well as abiotic factors. So let's go ahead and talk about what those two words mean. So here I have a population of deer. Now, when we really think about it, like why wouldn't deer cover the earth? Like how come they're not found everywhere on planet Earth, right? Like what limits this deer population? What prevents it from being so massive and being found everywhere? Well, for one, there's going to be predators that are going to limit how big a deer population can grow. Then we have things like competition. So not only will deer compete with other deer for plants if they're like an herbivore or a plant-eating species, but they'll compete with other herbivores. So maybe in this forest, the deer are also competing with elk or moose for the same food supply. And if there's a limited amount of food, then there's going to be a limited amount of herbivores that can survive. So there's competition between its own species as well as with other species. So that is called intra-specific competition as well as inter-specific competition. So there's competition that will limit how big a population can get. And then there's things called disease. So we have pathogens and like viruses or bacteria that will limit how big a population can grow. So as population density increases, like the more individuals you have living close together, the faster and easier disease will spread. And then we have parasites. Parasites can also limit how big a population can get. Those parasites are a type of symbiotic relationship that basically will harm the host. And so all of these factors, these are all living things that limit how big this deer population can grow and will basically prevent it from living like everywhere. And these biotic factors are basically living components that affect another organism or help to shape an ecosystem. So biotic factors are your living things that can influence population sizes, as well as community ecology and ecosystem. So biotic factors are your living factors that can influence populations. Now, on the opposite of biotic, you'd have abiotic. And in abiotic, these are going to be your factors that prevent deer population from growing like crazy. So one of those would be temperature. A lot of species on Earth have very specific temperature ranges that they require for life. So for example, you could not take a polar bear that lives in the Arctic and then transplant it to the tropical rainforests of Costa Rica. It'd be too hot and too humid, and that polar bear would overheat and die. And so when we look at temperatures, different animals have evolved to have a certain range that they fall into. And so temperature is not a living thing. It is abiotic and can have an impact on population size. Now, water availability is another abiotic factor. So here I have it like polluted water, but how much water is there? And is it clean and available drinking water? That will also limit how big a population can get. As a population grows and grows and grows, there's going to be competition for available resources. So how much water is there? If you've ever seen episodes of Planet Earth or nature shows, like there's some elephant episodes or like in Africa where it hasn't rained in a long time and the animals are close to like death from being like dehydrated, right? So water is essential to life, but it's not a living thing. So it's abiotic. And then, so is there drought, rainfall? How about if there's like a forest fire or poor soil or climate change, water availability, etc. All of these non-living things can affect ecosystems and life. And so, for example, if a forest fire rages through a forest, well, now there's no trees and therefore no food for the deer. Or on the opposite, let's say that there's lots of rainfall and abundant sunlight, and so now the plants are thriving. Well, then that would lead to lots of deer in a population. So these factors that are not living are called abiotic factors, and they are things such as climate or habitat and they influence or have an effect on ecosystems and the organisms within those ecosystems. Okay, so to kind of just, this is not a comprehensive list, but to give you a quick summary. So biotic is going to be your living factors that influence populations, communities, and ecosystems. And then we have our abiotic factors. So competition, for example, is between living things. They're both like two things are both alive competing for resources. So that would fall under a biotic factor. Whereas like the amount of rain can be measured, and that's a water. Water is not living, and that would be abiotic. But the amount of rain will determine how many plants can grow, which is food, which is a living thing, which would then be biotic. Okay, and then you have things like predators, for example, would be biotic, and that will limit how big a population can grow. And then available sunlight would be abiotic, and then like rocks and soil would be abiotic, and then disease and parasites would be biotic. And so you can keep on going with this, but living is biotic, not living is abiotic. Okay.